Hamas readies its reply to a U.S. proposed ceasefire and detainees exchange, the conflict in Gaza remains tense and unresolved. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine prepare to resume peace talks amid continued hostilities. Welcome to this coverage episode on Qnews. Stay with us for an in-depth analysis and expert insights. Hamas is expected to deliver its formal response today to the ceasefire and hostage release proposal presented by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. The American-backed plan includes a phased ceasefire lasting up to 60 days and the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. However, Hamas officials say they are concerned about the lack of firm guarantees for a permanent cessation of Israeli military operations. Washington has increased pressure on the group, urging it to respond positively to what it calls a historic opportunity to end the war. U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed optimism that a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas may be within reach. In remarks to reporters, Trump said all parties involved appear motivated to bring an end to the nearly 8-month-long conflict in Gaza. While he did not offer details, his statement signals renewed momentum in U.S. diplomatic efforts to broker a truce that would include a phased release of hostages and expanded humanitarian access.
Well, you'll see. But I have to approve the final deal with Nippon.
A Hamas leader has announced the movement's forthcoming response to the U.S. ceasefire proposal, reflecting Palestinian demands to end violence.
A senior Hamas official confirmed that the movement is preparing an official response to the ceasefire proposal presented by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. The announcement follows internal consultations aimed at addressing the proposal's terms in light of the Palestinian demands to end the violence in Gaza. Meanwhile, concerns are growing among the families of Israeli detainees held in Gaza. Israeli media report that the families fear a deal might not be reached. In response, U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Adam Boehler met with the families and pledged that, in the absence of an agreement, efforts would be made to obtain information about the detainees in exchange for humanitarian aid. Under the current proposal, Hamas is expected to provide detailed information about each Israeli detainee, including medical reports, within 10 days of the agreement's implementation. In return, Israel would release data on Palestinians detained since October 7, 2023, and disclose the number of Palestinian bodies held in its custody. In a related development, UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini warned that aid entering Gaza remains far below what is needed to avert catastrophe. He stated that only 900 trucks have entered the territory recently, which counts for just 10% of the daily requirement. Lazzarini urged the United Nations to mobilize greater support, emphasizing that famine could still be prevented with political will. The developments underscore the growing urgency for a comprehensive agreement that addresses both humanitarian needs and the fate of detainees on the two sides. The situation highlights the critical need for coordinated international action to prevent further humanitarian collapse in Gaza.
And for further analysis on the matter, Dr. Munir Nusayba, the international law professor at Al-Quds University, joins us from Occupy Jerusalem. Dr. Munir, thank you so much for joining us on this special coverage. And delving right in, how could the absence of legally binding guarantees for a permanent ceasefire affect Hamas' willingness to commit to the U.S. proposal? And what precedents exist for enforcing such agreements in protracted conflicts?
Well, we have been stuck in the situation in Gaza Strip at a very specific point. The point has been that on the one hand, Israel would like to only have a temporary ceasefire or a pause of hostilities, during which it will exchange prisoners and detainees with Hamas, and afterwards it will be able to continue the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. And as Trump, the US president, has also indicated earlier, to evacuate the Gaza Strip from its population and turn it into a Riviera of the Middle East, as Trump calls it. On the other hand, the Hamas, and I believe other Palestinian factions as well, are demanding the end of all hostilities as part of the deal. They want to make sure that, on the one hand, the fighting will stop, or actually the attacks on the Gaza Strip would stop, the genocide will stop, and at the same time, there will be a possibility to rebuild Gaza afterwards and revive the Gaza Strip again after this ceasefire. So this is the gap that has been that we have been stuck in for a very long time now.
Yes,
during the first.
sir, and
Sorry,
since
yes,
we're
please.
awaiting Hamas response today, delving into Hamas internal matters, in what ways might internal political divisions within Hamas and other Palestinian factions impact their negotiation strategy and response to the US-led initiative?
Well, I don't know how any Palestinian political divisions are relevant here, to be honest. The This actual negotiation is happening between Hamas mainly and Israel and the United States on the other hand. So the fact that there is a political division among Palestinian factions, maybe most importantly Fatah and Hamas, is irrelevant to this question. Um, because at the same time, that the two parties are actually having totally different and separate operations and policies and connections also internationally. And at the moment, it is only Hamas-Israeli American negotiation regarding the Gaza Strip and the end of the Israeli genocide in the Gaza Strip, as well as the release of all the prisoners and detainees and hostages.
Mhm. Now, considering the limited humanitarian aid currently entering Gaza, so the UN has announced about a plan that it can implement on a wider scale. So, how can the international community here effectively coordinate to scale up aid delivery while ensuring compliance with the ceasefire terms?
Well, it is very important. The problem with aid is that Israel is weaponizing uh, food and water and electricity and fuel and medicine and every basic need in the Gaza Strip against the population of the Gaza Strip. They are using it, on the one hand, as a way to pressure the population to leave the Gaza Strip in order for the Gaza Strip to become empty and available for the Israeli colonial plans and ambition in the Gaza Strip. But at the same time, the international community has been very clear about demand of allowing humanitarian aid in. And legally speaking, humanitarian aid, food and water and medicine and every necessity of life should be allowed without any conditions, should be allowed unconditionally to every Palestinian living in the Gaza Strip. Starvation as a method of war has been defined, of course, as a war crime in international law. And Netanyahu and Gallant have been accused by the International Criminal Court that they are using starvation as a weapon of war, which is a war crime. So it's one of it is the first count of accusation against Netanyahu and Gallant in the International Criminal Court. Similarly, the International Court of Justice has already more than 600 days ago issued provisional measures ordering Israel to allow humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, to allow food, water, and other necessary needs. However, Israel is not doing that. So the question is, how is the international community going to enforce international law? In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I mean, pressure is important. All diplomatic pressure is very important and necessary. And I believe that states can do even, more and elevate this pressure until Israel complies with international law. Uh, Sanctions are an important method that is always used in order to enforce international law. It is a peaceful method that is used to enforce international law. And in a
Mm-hmm.
situation of genocide that we are witnessing today in the Gaza Strip, it is absolutely necessary for every state to do everything in its capacity in order to stop and prevent the continuation of genocide as the Genocide Convention stipulates.
Yes, sir. Back to the point you mentioned earlier. So, Trump has expressed optimism about reaching a ceasefire, yet, on the other hand, Israel has declared 80% Gaza as a military zone, and it continues with its Gideon chariots plan. So, how do you read this contradictory scene?
I mean, Trump has been announcing that there will be a ceasefire soon, to tomorrow or the day after, for a very long time now. It's not his first announcement. Probably he uses this as a way to forward his negotiations and to pressure the parties that he's trying to negotiate with. I hope that there will be ceasefire. The population in Gaza, the civilian population, are starving and are being murdered every day by the Israeli strikes, and there is an absolute necessity for an immediate ceasefire. But unfortunately, I don't think that Trump is actually working on a ceasefire or an absolute ceasefire. What
Mm-hmm.
he's actually doing is that he is supporting the Israeli colonial plans in the Gaza Strip. He is continuing to support the Israeli plan to evict the Gaza Strip from its population, to forcibly displace
Mm-hmm.
the population of the Gaza Strip, and to rebuild Gaza in a totally different way without its population. Sorry.
No,
So, yeah,
so, adding
please.
to what you said, sir, Washington is urging Hamas to respond positively to the ceasefire proposal, and it called it a historic opportunity to end the war in Gaza. Yet, the nature of this proposal is phased. So, how might the phased nature of the proposed ceasefire influence the stability and the durability of peace efforts between Israel and Hamas?
See, the former deal was also phased, and the first phase was completed. And we were supposed to get into the second phase. And we were supposed to not, Israel was not supposed to restart the war and to restart the hostilities and the strikes on the Gaza Strip and the starvation after the first phase, but that's what it did anyway. That's why the phased negotiations uh, is um, is very doubtful. It's very doubtful that any phased process will lead to a ceasefire, and it's actually of a great concern. Why do we need a phased ceasefire? We have a lot of clear proposals for reconstructing Gaza and for ending ending this genocide in the Gaza Strip, but Israel does not want. It's very simply, Israel wants to get to the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip once it has gotten the most out of the ceasefires. Basically, the exchange of prisoners, which is the only thing that the current Israeli government is interested in. But other than that, you can see how Israel has destroyed the Gaza Strip, has murdered more than 50,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and is making sure that Gaza Strip cannot be an inhabitable place
Mm-hmm.
for Palestinians in the future, and that's what the main purpose of the Israeli genocidal campaign is. So
Mm-hmm.
the phased approach is very risky, and I can see that Israel and the United States continue to insist that any agreement must be phased, even though we should have been in the final phase by now, but that's not the reality as a result of the Israeli and American genocidal plan.
Yes, sir. That was Dr. Munir Nusayba from Occupied Jerusalem, the international law professor at Al-Quds University. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News and for all the insights you provided us with. Now, an in-depth analysis of the latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump has said both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zeleneskyy are stubborn as he continues efforts to mediate an end to the war in Ukraine. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump told reporters he was surprised and disappointed by recent Russian bombing raids while he was working on a ceasefire agreement. Despite the setback, the U.S. president said efforts to broker a resolution to the conflict are ongoing.
I saw things rather extraordinary, and I thought I'd play a tape of one of the people.
Russia claimed to have shot down more than 1,400 Ukrainian drones over the past week, as both countries continue to trade attacks in an intensifying conflict. According to a statement released by the Russian Defense Ministry, Russian forces targeted military airports, defense industry sites, and ammunition depots across Ukraine in recent strikes. The ministry also said Russian troops repelled several Ukrainian attacks and carried out offensives in the directions of Sumy, Kharkiv, and Donetsk. In total, it reported that 1,439 Ukrainian fixed-wing drones were downed, while Ukraine also used its newly developed air defense missile systems to counter Russian drone activity. The Kremlin has said a Russian delegation will travel to Istanbul this weekend ahead of a new round of peace talks with Ukraine, set to begin Monday morning. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed on Friday that both Russian and Ukrainian draft peace memorandums will be reviewed during the negotiations, though Moscow will not make its version public. Peskov added that discussions will include terms for a possible temporary truce, with safe navigation in the Black Sea expected to be a central topic. He also said high-level contacts between Russia, U.S., and Ukrainian leaders could take place depending on how the talks proceed. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zeleneskyy met with U.S. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal in Kyiv as Washington prepares to escalate pressure on Russia. Senator Graham has said the U.S. Senate will move forward next week with legislation to impose new sanctions on Russia and countries that continue buying Russian oil and goods. During the visit, Graham accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of deliberately prolonging the peace process. He also said he had spoken with President Donald Trump before the trip and that Trump now expects firm action from Moscow. And for further analysis on the matter, Rami Al-Qalyoubi, the visiting lecturer at the Higher School of Economics, joins us from Moscow. Mr. Rami, thank you so much for joining us on this special coverage. And first off, how significant is President Trump's role as a mediator in the Russian-Ukraine conflict, given his recent comments on both leaders being stubborn?
Actually, the United States play a significant role as an intermediary between Russia and Ukraine. And actually, during the Biden term, the United States were a part of the conflict on the side of Ukraine, but the situation changed dramatically after Trump returned or came back to the White House. And now Trump, who is the first American president since more than a century who managed to come back to the White House after a term of another president, actually seeks to be a peacemaker and not a war party representative. So, and Trump's role as the mediator between Russia and Ukraine has been highly appreciated by the Russian side. But on the other side, the Ukrainian part considers him to be biased to Russia and not imposing necessary sanctions. But obviously, this is in Trump era that Russia and Ukraine resumed direct negotiations after they were stopped for more than 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, regarding the recent Russian bombing raids, and given that there will be a new round of talks between Russia and Ukraine to be held in Istanbul, what impact will it have on the outcomes of this new round?
Actually, I don't feel very optimistic because actually, till the moment, Ukraine did not confirm officially that it will participate. But even in case if it participates, Russia and Ukraine have a very different vision of the regulation of the conflict. Russia is insisting on taking under its control Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions, as well as Crimea and Lugansk region, which is already under Russia's control. But on the other hand, Ukraine considers this demand to be non-realistic, as there are some areas in Donetsk region, as well as in Zaporozhye and Kherson, which are still under Kiev's control. So, and from the point of view of Ukraine, Russian demands do not reflect the situation on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Now, assessing Russia's side of the story, how credible are Russia's claims of shooting down over 1,400 Ukrainian drones, and what does this say about the intensity of the conflict?
It's quite credible because in the last few days there were many videos spread on social media with drones attacking different Russian cities, and actually Russia is blaming Ukraine for peddling the peace process by launching different missiles and planes to Russian cities. But on the other hand, Russia as well organized few broad attacks on Kiev by using missiles and drones.
Mm-hmm. Now, more on the upcoming peace talks to take place in Istanbul. What are the likely objectives and challenges for both Russia and Ukraine?
Well, for Russia, the main challenge is to persuade Ukraine to accept Russian presence, even without any official statements that Russia is present in some areas in eastern Ukraine. But for Ukraine, the main challenge is to draw a picture in front of President Trump that Russia does not want to establish peace and to push Trump to impose new sanctions upon Russia. So there is an impression that we are watching Russian Ukrainian theater, and the main spectator is Trump.
Yes, building on the U.S. sanctions you've mentioned, how might the new U.S. sanctions proposed by the Senate influence Russia's position and the broader conflict?
Well, sanctions will have negative impact on Russian economy, but at the same time, these are not international sanctions, as they are not imposed through the UN Security Council, which means that these sanctions will not be obligatory for such countries as China and India and Arab and Asian and African countries, which means that Russia will continue to develop its partnerships with non-Western countries. And actually, during the last few years, we could see that when we speak about such huge economic power as Russia, it's impossible to remove it from the world's economic map as the West was seeking to.
Now, sir, looking at the wider picture here, to what extent could high-level contact between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine shape the outcome of the peace negotiations?
Actually, Zeleneskyy proposed to organize a three-party meeting with Putin and Trump, but this is for the moment refused by Russia, as Russia insists that any meeting on the highest level should be after achieving some agreements and not just to take some photos for media. So for the moment, we should not expect any three-party negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, but they might be possible in the few months, as on one hand, there is a feeling that Russia and Ukraine continue to fight, but on the other hand, this might be like a last battle which is used by each party to improve its position in the negotiations.
That was Rami El-Qalyoubi from Moscow, the visiting lecturer at the Higher School of Economics. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And as diplomatic efforts continue to unfold, the world watches closely, hoping for breakthroughs that can bring lasting peace to both Gaza and Ukraine. Q News will keep you updated with the latest developments. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. This was Salma Marwan, and thank you for watching.